The windows were half open. The wind gently passed through, and the bells of St. Peter's Square rang more slowly than usual, as if they were asking for silence. In a secluded room, under light blankets and with folded hands, lay the man whose voice had once guided millions. But now he was silent. The Pope barely spoke. His eyes were closed, not in absence but in contemplation. The few people present, medical staff and clergy, stood in reverence. Every movement was small, yet carried the weight of eternity. Even the light falling through the curtains seemed muted, almost reverent. Between one prayer and the next, the Holy Father opened his eyes and looked at a nearby nun. With a fragile, sacred voice, he whispered, "Bring Balthasar." Confusion arose. "Balthasar?" a cardinal asked quietly, but the Pope's gaze left no doubt. Balthasar was a dog. A loyal companion, medium-sized, white, gentle, with a great heart. Since the Pope's illness began, Balthasar no longer lived in the Vatican, but with Sister Dominica in Castel Gandolfo. She fed him, spoke to him, stroked him. But the dog had changed. He no longer played. He sometimes howled softly, as if sensing an absence he couldn't name. His gaze often drifted into nothingness. His tail barely moved, as though part of his soul had been taken. To understand the Pope's wish, one had to go far back. To Argentina, long before the white robes and the Vatican stage. Back then, Jorge Mario was a bright-eyed boy from humble parents. His mother had taught him, "Every creature carries the breath of God." Jorge took this to heart. He loved animals, especially dogs. He shared his bread with strays, petted the ones adults avoided. Even as a seminarian, even as archbishop, he never lost this tenderness. He fed the dogs around the monastery, spoke with them, understood their sorrow and their hope, just through a glance. And when he became Pope and chose the name Francis, after the saint who loved all creatures, no one was surprised. Not even when, one day, a pale-haired dog appeared in the Vatican gardens and quietly lay at his feet. Francis only smiled, slowly knelt down and said, "Balthasar." From that moment, the dog became part of his life, his rituals, his silent prayers. Balthasar was more than a pet, he was a soulmate. The search began immediately. A car was sent to Castel Gandolfo. Sister Dominica held the dog in her lap, gently stroked him. "He knows," she whispered to the driver. Balthasar, who hadn't eaten for days, wasn't trembling with fear, but as if he knew where they were going. At the Vatican, everything was prepared. When the car arrived, Balthasar got out without hesitation. He didn't bark, didn't pull on the leash. Step by step, he moved through the corridors, as though something divine guided him. Guards stepped aside. Nuns bowed their heads. Before the Pope's chamber, the dog stopped. Not in fear, but as if asking for permission, as if sensing the sacredness behind the door. The door opened slowly. Inside it was quiet. Light fell softly through a white curtain. The Pope lay with his eyes closed, his face peaceful. Balthasar entered. No sound, no bark, only presence. He stood by the bed, looked at the face of the man he loved, sat down and didn't move. Minutes passed. Balthasar remained like a guardian. Then the Pope slightly moved his fingers. Balthasar lay down, his snout near the Pope's hand. There was no touch, just closeness. A gesture of deep connection. Sister Dominica left the room. The sun dipped over Rome. The world rushed on. But here, time stood still. The air was filled with something invisible. A solemn stillness draped over everything. Only quiet breathing could be heard, like a whispered prayer. A moment that escaped reason but touched the heart. In that moment, Balthasar was more than a dog. He was a silent witness, a companion of the soul. Outside, the sky glowed gold. Inside, Balthasar still lay by the bed. His eyes were open, but calm and unmoving, as if seeing something beyond the visible. No one disturbed him. No one dared even whisper. The air in the room was heavy, not with fear, but with sacred awareness. The Pope's secretary still received messages from around the world. From believers, leaders, politicians, all asking about the Holy Father. But in the room itself, silence said more than words. Nurses moved gently, like in a ritual. Every action was mindful, every gesture dignified. One could feel this was not an ordinary moment. In a side corridor, 2 nuns prepared a bouquet, white lilies and olive branches, a symbol of peace and endurance. The olive branch, since ancient times, meant hope after a storm. It was a quiet sign, a gesture where words were too heavy. Balthasar raised his head as the nuns entered. He watched them closely, then lay his head back down, breathing deeply, as if inhaling the sacred air. Time in the room flowed differently. It stretched. The Pope breathed softly, almost imperceptibly. Sometimes a sigh escaped his lips, a memory or a final goodbye to life. No one could tell. It was a moment between worlds, between now and what comes next. Balthasar did not leave his side. As if the dog knew, his place was exactly here, in that space between life and light. In a monastery in Assisi, a handwritten note was being read aloud. A letter from a Franciscan community, who felt the final hour was drawing near. The words spoke of a man, who not only preached, but saw the divine in all things. In animals, in trees, in the simplest gestures. When the letter ended, Balthasar lifted his head briefly, as if he had heard the words. Then he closed his eyes again. No one dared ask if he had truly understood. But in that moment, everyone believed he had, because sometimes a single glance says more than an entire gospel. The Vatican remained awake. Soft lights glowed in corridors, on windowsills in alcoves. Outside the city buzzed. Cars moved, voices echoed. But inside, everything felt like one long breath held still. People spoke only with their eyes. No one waited for death. They waited for a sign. And then, ever so gently, Balthasar moved. He stood, stepped to the bedside, and stretched as if to draw nearer to the Pope. He laid his snout on the Pope's hand again, soft, tender, with a dignity that silenced even the cardinals. The first rays of the new morning fell softly over Rome. The steps of St. Peter's Square were empty, but a few faithful had gathered. No announcement, no message. It was an inner knowing that had drawn them. They lit candles, held rosaries. Some sat quietly, others prayed with closed eyes. Balthasar still lay in place. But then, as if sensing something, he slowly stood, stepped closer to the bed, and once more rested his snout on the Pope's hand. Gentle. No pressure. A gesture of perfect loyalty. No one dared speak. It was a moment of pure silence. One of the sisters pressed her hand to her mouth. A cardinal turned away. There was something sacred in the air, the transition, an invisible movement. And then, Balthasar closed his eyes too. His body remained still, but his nearness spoke of a love that could not die, a connection beyond words. As the bells outside began to ring gently, inside there remained only the knowledge. Something beautiful, something ancient, was happening. In Buenos Aires, in the neighborhood where Jorge Mario Bergoglio once played as a child, an old woman placed flowers on the sidewalk. He always loved the dogs, she murmured, and as she lit a candle, a tear ran down her cheek. No one had told her anything. She had simply felt it, just like the animals feel it, just like Balthasar felt it. As the world awakened, a different day seemed to be ending, not with noise, but with a heartbeat growing quiet. And a dog, knowing what light truly meant, remained faithful, resting at the threshold. Between life and memory, dawn had fully embraced Rome. Above the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, the light played in pale gold and orange hues. While the Vatican was wrapped in silent anticipation, Balthasar lay motionless beside the Pope's bed, his snout still close to the hand that had once delivered blessings to millions. It was not sleep. It was a vigil, a waiting within the transition, tangible to all who were present. The few in the room had nearly stopped moving. A sister sat in the corner, murmuring a quiet prayer. Her gaze lowered. A cardinal leaned against the wall, his eyes damp though no sound left his lips. The Pope's personal secretary held a small wooden cross, a gift once given to him by a child. The air was thick with meaning. Each breath felt like both a memory and a farewell. Nothing in the room was ordinary anymore. The clock didn't tick. No one looked at a screen. Time didn't matter, only the sense that something sacred was happening. Now, in this moment, Balthasar slightly raised his head. His gaze wandered to the Pope's face. It was peaceful. No movement, no tremor, but also no coldness. Only stillness. A stillness that spoke louder than any sermon. Then slowly, the bells began to ring again. No alarm, no urgency. A gentle bronze echo that drifted through the air like a prayer. It was the sign. The lights in the room didn't brighten, nor did they dim. They remained as they were, carried by the sun now climbing higher. One of the sisters approached the bed. Her steps were barely audible. She reached out, touched the Pope's pulse, and paused. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she gave a slow nod. Balthasar didn't move. His eyes were closed, but his body breathed calmly. He had felt it, perhaps before anyone else. There was no weeping in the usual sense. No dramatic outbursts. The silence was the echo of farewell. A passing that didn't want a stage. A death that wasn't an end, but a gentle crossing. The news didn't break through loudspeakers. It moved through corridors. From gaze to gaze. From heart to heart. Cardinals rose. Sisters stood still. Guards lowered their hands. A young priest who had just arrived knelt down. Even though he hadn't heard anything. He just knew. Just like the people outside in St. Peter's Square. Who began to pray. Without knowing why. Outside, more and more faithful gathered. From all over the world. Photos were brought out. Candles lit. Rosaries clutched between whispered prayers. Some held pets in their arms. Not as symbols, but as an expression of love. The connection was intuitive, deep. It wasn't just a pope who had passed. It was a man who had spoken to animals as if they were brothers. One who had seen the breath of God in a stray soul. Balthasar rose. As the bells continued to ring, not fast, not dramatic, just quietly, he walked to the center of the room, turned toward the window, and lay down again. His gaze went outward, as if he saw something others could not. And in that moment, he was no longer just a dog. He was part of the story. A place in the garden. In the Vatican Gardens, near an old olive tree, staff began preparing a space. Not for a ceremony, but for a moment of stillness. Balthasar was to be brought there. Not banished, but honored. He had been the final companion of a man who had walked with so many, and his place was where light filtered through the leaves. A reminder of loyalty that needs no words. The world began to move again. News agencies issued breaking headlines. But at the heart of Rome, in the Vatican, something else stirred. A deep, quiet love that sought no speech, but found its voice in the closeness of a dog who remains still until the final breath. Rome was still quiet as the first sunbeams crept over the city. St. Peter's Square slowly filled. No official call had gone out. People stood shoulder to shoulder, hardly speaking, holding candles in their hands. Some wept silently. Others simply looked up. At the window of the Pope's chamber, the world had lost a shepherd, and a dog had sensed it first. Balthasar had been taken to the Vatican garden, near the olive trees. He lay down in the grass, his gaze turned upward, to the now empty window. No one disturbed him. The gardeners worked in silence. Clergy passed by wordlessly. He was not just a dog. He had become a symbol. For many, he was the final witness to a sacred crossing. So he was given a quiet place, where the wind whispered through the branches, and the light danced in golden patches on the ground.